I had just wrapped up the last of the documents Henry handed me, crucial for his handling of a significant portfolio I was still overseeing. This particular portfolio involved none other than Albert Mulligan, the billionaire investor and entrepreneur we often referred to as Albert Mulligan. Albert was infamous for using his fortune to stage hostile takeovers, buying out stocks to seize control of companies. Once in charge, he wasted no time dismantling them, selling off assets to maximize returns, often leaving unsuspecting individuals in his wake without a shred of concern for the damage he caused. As Albert's attorney and occasional legal sparring partner, my job was to ensure his transactions stayed above board and compliant with SEC regulations. By keeping him out of trouble with federal authorities, I also helped him expand his wealth, a feat that brought significant financial benefits to our firm. Harris, Livingston, and Scott Incorporated. Henry had also been making considerable progress managing other clients' portfolios, aiming to take full control within the next 2 weeks. That would mark the conclusion of a 3-month process of transferring all my clients, except a select few. Only Henry, Lauren Livingston, and William Scott were aware of my imminent retirement. I often reminded myself that it was time to step back and finally prioritize my personal life. As a founding partner alongside Lauren and Owen, I had seen our small practice evolve into one of Columbus, Ohio's largest and most influential law firms. But this professional triumph came at a steep personal cost, particularly in my marriage to Jessica. Despite celebrating our 20th wedding anniversary last month, the cracks in our relationship were glaring. Jessica and I have 2 kids, Jacob, 19, and Ella, 18, both thriving in college. Yet, despite our material comforts, Jessica's coldness toward our love life was a constant source of frustration for me. While my desire for intimacy remained strong, Jessica dismissed her lack of interest as a passing issue, assuring me she'd bring it up with her doctor at her next appointment, a promise she made nearly a year ago. Needless to say, nothing had improved, and I eventually gave up trying to discuss it further. Adding to my unease were Jessica's increasingly frequent trips back to her hometown of Mansfield, Ohio. She claimed these visits were to help her ailing mother and support her sister, Seren, who lived there. Seren, recently divorced and living alone, welcomed Jessica's assistance, which supposedly gave her a much-needed break. These trips started about 6 months ago and now occurred every other week. Jessica would leave Thursday mornings and return late Sunday nights, staying in touch with nightly calls at 9 o'clock. While she always made sure her phone was accessible, her absences left me alone for days at a time, a situation I had grown to resent. She left again this morning, and despite my frustration, I told her I was planning a big surprise that would be ready in a couple of weeks. I even hinted that Lauren was involved, hoping to spark some curiosity, or perhaps jealousy. But Jessica barely reacted. Unmoved, she returned to packing. After our routine goodbyes, I headed to work, knowing she'd be gone within the hour. Later that day, I wrapped up my office tasks, chatted briefly with Megan, my secretary, and walked down the plush hallway to Lauren's office, knocking once before stepping in, a common practice among us partners. I greeted her and suggested we call it a day and grab a drink. Lauren, however, declined, mentioning she had plans with Mark, another colleague, to attend their son's school play. Their son, Mark Jr., had the lead role in Pirates of Doom, and while I teased her about the play, I admitted parents always think their kids are stars. Lauren laughed in agreement and, at 46, happily married for a decade, radiated a contentment that often felt out of reach in my own life. She reassured me about the progress on an ongoing project, declining Henry's assistance and confirming everything was on track. Concerned about my looming retirement, Lauren expressed hope of convincing me to stay, emphasizing how much I contributed to the firm's success. I praised her leadership, assuring her that she, Owen, and the younger team members, particularly Henry, would keep driving the firm forward. I even floated the idea of offering Melanie Gardner a partnership soon. Our conversation wound down, and I wished her good night, promising to see her the next day. I drove home to my sprawling estate in the Columbus suburbs, a 5-acre property with a 5,000-square-foot house, a pool that flowed into a hot tub, tennis courts, and lush gardens. With Jacob and Ella off at college, the house felt oversized for just the two of us. Jessica had even let go of the cook and maid, leaving the space eerily empty. She'd recently suggested downsizing, though I felt we should wait a couple more years before making any moves. After parking in the 4-car garage, I stepped into the quiet kitchen, microwaved a frozen dinner, and changed into casual clothes. Just as I returned downstairs, the landline rang. Hoping it was a call about one of my ads, I picked up, pleased to find it was about my boat. The 32-foot powered sailboat, docked at Lake Erie during the warmer months, had recently been taken out for a test run by a prospective buyer. The marina owner, acting on my behalf, vouched for the boat's condition, and we quickly finalized the deal. The buyer agreed to send a cashier's check to a P.O. box I provided. Once the check cleared, the boat's title would be handed over at the marina. Jessica, who had never been fond of the boat and hadn't set foot on it in years, would be relieved to hear it was sold. With my Jaguar and Audi also on the way out, and my retirement plan well underway, I was on track to simplify everything. Though selling the house would take longer, I had already moved some furniture into a cozy bungalow we'd eventually call home. After finishing my dinner without much thought, I grabbed a cold Miller Lite, settled into the entertainment room, and flicked on the TV for some mindless distraction. Opting for an adult movie, I quickly found myself unimpressed. The plot, if it could even be called that, was uninspired, offering nothing but the same repetitive nonsense. At precisely 9 o'clock, Jessica called. I asked how her trip went, and she assured me it had been uneventful. She mentioned her mom's health was slightly better, but noted that Seren was stressed. She then suggested staying an extra day to help out more, asking if that was okay with me. Although I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, I told Jessica she should do whatever she thought was necessary. I casually mentioned I might stay late at work since being home without her was lonely. I also asked if she needed anything for Monday, pointing out that she hadn't packed much for this trip. She explained that she had left some items there previously and assured me everything was taken care of. Then, to my surprise, she brought up the big surprise I had hinted at earlier, expressing some curiosity about it. Her sudden interest caught me off guard, but I told her everything was on schedule and that Lauren was nearly finished with her part. Jessica promised to call me the next night, wished me good night, and ended with a lukewarm, "I love you." The way she rushed through the words made it clear she didn't really mean them. Still, I smiled to myself, assuming she was just preoccupied with her mother's situation. Reflecting on Jessica's family, I couldn't help but think about how dysfunctional they were. I had never liked her overbearing mother or her self-centered sister, Seren. Seren's history of infidelity had led to her divorce, which only added to my frustrations as I faced another weekend alone. To distract myself, I called Jacob and Ella, catching up with them for over an hour. I reminded them about our plans in 2 weeks, feeling a little lighter after the conversation. Later, I let myself relax on the couch, only to fall asleep and wake up in the middle of the night with a stiff neck. Grumbling, I made my way to bed and, for once, slept soundly without any of the troubling dreams that had plagued me recently. The next 2 weeks flew by as I worked tirelessly to finalize my cases and prepare Henry to take over my responsibilities. Most of my clients were supportive of my decision and willing to transition to Henry's care. A few needed additional reassurance, which I arranged through Lauren or William. By the time Jessica left for Mansfield again on Thursday, everything was in place. Interestingly, Jessica seemed to have forgotten about the surprise entirely, and I chose not to remind her before she left. I decided it would be better to bring it up during her Sunday call, especially if she mentioned staying an extra day. Either way, I was prepared. Friday, my last day at work, was a whirlwind of activity. Megan and I cleaned out my office and transferred all the remaining paper files to Henry. I instructed Megan to forward all new calls to him, sticking to the plan. Since Henry and Megan worked seamlessly together, he would inherit her as his secretary. Before leaving, I spoke with Lauren to confirm everything was set for my transition. Despite her busy schedule, including a courthouse appearance later that morning, she promised to make it back in time for my retirement party at the Haven Hotel. Jessica's absence at the event was expected, but it didn't dampen my spirits. After lunch, I spent the afternoon tackling a few final tasks. By 3 o'clock, everything was locked into place. The papers for the house were signed, and the movers were on schedule to finish by late Saturday. A professional cleaning crew I'd hired would follow them, ensuring the house was spotless by evening. I had even offered them a bonus for finishing on time. The realtors assured me the for sale sign would go up by Sunday, and several buyers were already lined up to view the property starting Monday. I had priced it aggressively for a quick sale. I also double-checked our financial arrangements. Jessica and I maintained separate accounts alongside a joint one, but I had always insisted on minimal credit usage, ensuring we carried no balances. Jessica was careful with money and managed our shared accounts well, but she never asked about my private business finances or the firm's accounts. Over the years, she seemed to forget they even existed. That oversight made it easy to close our joint accounts and transfer the retirement funds into a new brokerage account under my sole control. I planned to handle our joint expenses in cash for the time being, especially since our new home would be out of the country. I had already established an international account with a global bank, ensuring access to our funds in Europe and South America. I felt confident Jessica would adapt, given her knack for managing finances. Finally, I verified our tickets for an extended stay at a luxury resort in Costa Rica. With its stunning beaches, warm sunshine, and endless activities like sailing and horseback riding, it was the perfect escape. I had visited the resort solo to confirm it met my standards and left all the travel arrangements to Megan, who ensured everything was booked and ready. Over the years, my success as a high-profile attorney brought in substantial wealth. Between hefty retainers from affluent clients and savvy investments in high-risk accounts, I had amassed a fortune. Using my legal expertise, I moved most of my earnings into offshore accounts, ensuring everything was done lawfully. These accounts, unknown to Jessica, would undoubtedly shock her if she ever learned their full value. Most importantly, they were untouchable by U.S. laws and taxes. Jessica had encouraged my retirement for some time, often complaining about how much I worked. I believed this surprise would make her happy, giving her the lifestyle she had wanted. I planned to announce everything on Sunday night when she returned. Confident that she'd be home by then, I timed the reveal for her morning call if she extended her trip. The retirement party that night was a hit. I danced with the women, chatted with the men, and swapped stories about our most memorable cases. Henry remained close by, eager to soak up any final bits of wisdom. I trusted him completely and saw him as an invaluable asset to the firm. Lauren and Owen, sworn to secrecy, knew every detail of my plans. As Lauren and I danced, she subtly expressed her approval of my choices. She confirmed that all the documentation was in order, ensuring everything would align with my and Jessica's surprise. I joked that Jessica would be thrilled, and Lauren responded with a sarcastic remark that made us both laugh. I shared that I had tickets for a Costa Rican getaway, leaving Sunday night. I promised to call Lauren once settled, sharing my new permanent number. I also encouraged her to think about a similar escape with Owen someday. She smiled, saying she loved her work too much to step away just yet. I stayed at the party until almost midnight, finally leaving to check my phone. I had missed Jessica's call but found a voicemail. Her tone was distant as she informed me she'd be staying at her mother's for the night. She asked me not to call, claiming her mother needed rest, and promised to check in the next evening. She ended the message with a simple request, "Be home." As expected, Jessica didn't call again after leaving her brief voicemail. I spent the evening meticulously packing both my clothes and hers, ensuring her belongings were neatly organized. With limited time left before Sunday night, I wanted to avoid unnecessary return trips once the movers finished the next day. I handled her things with deliberate care, leaving no room for complaints or accusations of carelessness. After finalizing the packing, I planned to stay at the bungalow that night. I ensured all calls would be forwarded to my new cell starting the next day, wrapping up my tasks efficiently. I made one last phone call to confirm that the final detail of the surprise was in place, then went to bed, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and nervous anticipation. The party from the night before still lingered in my mind, leaving me both physically tired and emotionally on edge, hoping nothing would derail my plans. Saturday was a day filled with action as the movers arrived to begin packing and transporting the furniture from our home. Though a small pang of sadness crept in as I watched them work, I shrugged it off. Sentimentality had no place in this transition. Instead, I drove to the bungalow to meet Jacob and Ella, who were arriving around noon. It was time to bring them up to speed. They knew I was retiring but didn't yet know about the full extent of my plans, including the move to Costa Rica. I also needed them to promise not to call Jessica and spoil the surprise. When they arrived, I welcomed them warmly, sat them down, and got straight to the point. I explained everything as concisely as possible, answering their questions and providing more details when needed. Their reactions were mixed. Neither Jacob nor Ella seemed thrilled about what I was doing, but I reassured them that their college tuition was fully covered and that they'd always have a place to call home, wherever that might be. I told them my retirement was a decision Jessica and I had discussed and agreed upon, presenting it as a logical next step. They insisted they wanted to talk to Jessica, but I firmly made them promise to wait until Sunday night when she returned. Reluctantly, they agreed. Later, we went out to dinner together, keeping the mood light despite the undercurrent of tension. When Jessica called at 9 o'clock, I kept the conversation short. She was her usual distant self, not mentioning any plans to extend her stay, so I still expected her home on Sunday. After the call, the kids revisited their concerns about my plans. I assured them once again that I was fine and that everything would work out. Once they were asleep in the spare room, I made another round of phone calls to confirm the movers were done and that the cleaning crew was on schedule. Satisfied with the updates, I made one final call before ending the night. Sunday was calm, with little left to do. I checked the house and found it spotless. The movers and cleaners had done an excellent job. The home was ready for showings, and I drove back to the bungalow, waiting for Jessica's call, which I expected between 10 o'clock and 10:30. Jacob and Ella had gone out to see some friends, leaving me alone when the call finally came. I picked up on the first ring, trying to keep my tone steady. "Are you ready to come home?" I asked. Jessica's voice was strained as she said she wanted to stay a few more days to help Seren with some tasks. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, as if she anticipated my anger. And she was right. Months of bottled-up frustration surged forward. She wanted to stay longer. Again, I already knew why. I'd known for over 3 months, long enough to plan the surprise I had carefully crafted. It was time to act. My anger broke through, and though I struggled to keep my voice level, it trembled with the force of suppressed rage. "Why don't you just stay as long as you like with Evan?" I said sarcastically, the venom unmistakable. Before she could respond, I confronted her about her affairs with Evan and another man, Matt, detailing the betrayal I had been quietly enduring for months. My voice grew louder as I accused her of carrying on these relationships for at least 6 months while I pretended everything was fine. There was a long silence on the other end, broken only by a stifled sob, and then the line went dead. She hung up. For a moment, I sat frozen, staring at the phone in disbelief. She had hung up, leaving me seething with unresolved fury. My hand trembled as I set the phone on the table. The anger that had been boiling over now had no outlet. Slumping into a chair, I tried to process what had just happened. Moments later, the disposable phone I had bought for emergencies rang, its sharp tone breaking the silence. The lack of voicemail meant it just kept ringing until I finally answered. My voice was flat and cold when I said, "Yes." The fire of my anger had burned out, replaced by a hollow numbness. It was Seren on the other end, her voice laced with anger and panic. She demanded to know what I had said to Jessica, accusing me of upsetting her to the point of hysteria. My frustration quickly redirected toward Seren, who I saw as complicit in Jessica's betrayal. "Why don't you ask Evan?" I replied bitterly, my sarcasm cutting. I accused both Seren and Jessica of their involvement with Evan Cooper and Matt Reed, recounting details of their meetings at motels. My voice rose as I unloaded my grievances, but I stopped short of shouting. Seren tried to defend Jessica, insisting it wasn't what I thought and blaming it all on a stupid mistake she herself was partly responsible for. She begged me not to do anything drastic and to give Jessica a chance to explain. "I've already made arrangements," I said coldly. "Someone will be there when Jessica gets back. But it won't be me." I told Seren I had informed our children about the truth, including the weekends Jessica had supposedly been caring for their mother. Seren sounded horrified, but I ended the conversation curtly, telling her that the kids had taken the news surprisingly well. I wasn't about to be swayed by her pleas. Jessica's betrayal was clear, and I had no intention of letting her rewrite the narrative. Seren's desperate attempts to plead for reconsideration only fueled my resolve. I reminded her that it wasn't me who destroyed our family. It was Jessica and her. With a sharp, final tone, I said goodbye, adding that her mother, who had never liked me, was probably laughing her bony butt off at this very moment. Ending the call, I stood in the small bungalow, taking one last look around. Jessica will love it, I thought with a bitter chuckle. The irony wasn't lost on me. I switched off all the lights, placed the spare keys and a letter for Jessica on the table, and walked out the door. As I shut it behind me, a strange sense of finality washed over me. I climbed into my rental car and drove to Megan's apartment. She was waiting outside with her luggage, a bright smile lighting up her face as I pulled up. I got out, loaded her 3 suitcases into the back of the car, and opened the door for her. She slid into the passenger seat with a confident grin. As I settled behind the wheel, Megan turned to me, her excitement palpable. She mentioned how difficult it had been to see me every day at work, unable to touch me or openly talk about us. She credited Jessica for throwing me away, which, in her eyes, had opened the door for her to sweep in and enjoy our weekends together. Jessica's perspective. What I learned later from Jessica shed light on her mindset that evening. She recalled how the conversation began with me asking the usual question, "Are you coming home?" She described sounding normal, calm even, as if nothing was amiss. A facade she believed I had no reason to doubt. That belief gave her the confidence to press ahead with her request. Glancing at Seren for reassurance, she asked if I'd mind her staying a couple more days. Seren's encouraging smile bolstered her resolve, and Jessica reminded herself that I wouldn't object. After all, I never had before. She had convinced herself I'd never uncover the truth. Jessica insisted to herself that she still loved me, truly, but our intimacy had long since lost its spark. Her affair wasn't about love. It was about rediscovering a side of herself she didn't know existed. Evan awakened something primal in her, that she justified as harmless, believing it would ultimately strengthen her love for me. But she had underestimated me. When my calm yet biting words came through the phone, her world shattered. I coolly asked why I should mind her staying, given that Evan and Matt would likely keep her company. My accusations were precise. 6 months or longer of betrayal, while I had been left to pretend everything was fine. Jessica was stunned into silence. Panic overwhelmed her, and in a fit of desperation, she slammed the phone down, her sob echoing in the quiet room. Her carefully constructed web of lies had unraveled, and the realization hit her like a freight train. I knew everything. Terrified that she was about to lose the man she claimed to truly love, Jessica grabbed her keys and bolted from Seren's kitchen. She jumped into her car, her hands trembling as she started the engine and peeled out of the driveway. The usual 3.5-hour drive to Columbus felt endless as she sped down the interstate, ignoring speed limits and the risk of being pulled over. As the miles passed, she rehearsed her explanation, desperate to make me understand. She would tell me Evan and Matt meant nothing. They were mistakes, fueled by foolishness and Seren's encouragement. Seren had convinced her that indulging in something new and forbidden would reignite her passion, which she could then bring back into our marriage. But deep down, Jessica knew none of it made sense. Why hadn't we been intimate in 6 months? She had no real answers, only a growing sense of regret and a desperate hope that I would forgive her. When she finally pulled into our driveway, her stomach dropped. 4 cars were already there, our kids' cars among them. Panic turned to dread as she parked on the grass and ran toward the house. Her heart pounded as she fumbled with her keys, but when she tried the lock, the key wouldn't turn. Frustrated, she tried again and again, but it was no use. With a cry of despair, She threw the key onto the porch, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. Turning back to the door, she pounded on it with her fists, the pain in her hands barely registering. Eventually, her strength gave out, and she slumped against the door, tears streaming down her face. When she looked up, she noticed a man standing nearby, the same one who had stepped out of an unfamiliar car as she arrived. He had tried to stop her earlier, but she had ignored him in her frantic desperation. Now he stood silently, watching her with a mixture of pity and resolve. Jessica's mind raced as she realized she had no idea what to do next.
The man standing before me, with a composed and professional demeanor, asked if I was Mrs. Harris. I nodded mutely, and he handed me an envelope. "You are served, ma'am," he said in a low, formal tone. Before I could process the weight of his words, he pulled out a smaller envelope and handed it to me as well. "These are the keys to your new residence. The address is included inside, and the property is fully yours, free of any burdens. You'll find the deed and all relevant documents enclosed." I took the envelopes with trembling hands, my mind a fog of pain and confusion. He wasn't finished. From his coat pocket, he retrieved a larger, legal-sized envelope and handed it over. "This contains checks equal to the balances of your savings and checking accounts, which have been closed. This house has been listed for sale, and the proceeds will be sent to you once the transaction is completed. Everything is detailed in the divorce documentation, including the terms Chester has agreed to." The man closed his briefcase with a finality that echoed in the silence and reached into his jacket one last time. He pulled out a crisp business card and placed it in my hand. "This is your husband's attorney's contact information in case you have questions." With that, he turned and walked to his car, stopping briefly to speak to someone in another vehicle parked nearby. Moments later, he backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. I stood frozen, clutching the envelopes as the weight of what had just happened bore down on me. Glancing at the business card, my heart sank when I saw the name, Lauren Livingston. Anger surged through me, but it fizzled just as quickly, replaced by a deep, aching regret. Lauren had been a scapegoat in my mind for years, a wedge I used to manipulate Chester into guilt. Now I understood that the real problem wasn't her, it had always been me. As if summoned by my thoughts, Lauren appeared, walking toward me with a calm but piercing gaze. "Hello, Jessica," she greeted me coolly. "You don't look so well today." I said nothing, my throat too tight to speak. Lauren continued, her tone professional but laced with unmistakable judgment. "Chester asked me to handle everything in his absence. If you have questions, I can provide answers." First, Chester retired as of Friday. We threw him a wonderful farewell party. Plenty of people came to celebrate him. "Too bad you couldn't be there, but of course you had other priorities, didn't you?" Each word struck me like a hammer blow, but Lauren pressed on. "Second, this house has been turned over to a realtor for sale. You granted Chester power of attorney some time ago, and he used it to transfer the title into his name. But don't worry, the proceeds are entirely yours. Chester wanted you to have them as part of the divorce settlement. He also purchased a fully furnished bungalow for you, and your children can take you there." I opened my mouth to respond, but Lauren's next words silenced me. "Finally, Chester has given me full authority to manage his affairs and represent him in the divorce. He has left the country and has no intention of returning anytime soon." Her words crushed me. It felt as though my world was crumbling, piece by piece. My breathing grew shallow as I struggled to absorb the weight of what she was saying. Lauren's tone softened slightly, but the reproach in her words remained. "I can't pretend to know why you did what you did to Chester," she said, her voice steady. "I've worked with him for 15 years, and I know he loved you and your children more than anything. Finding out about your affairs nearly broke him. He considered harming himself." I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. "But Mark and I convinced him to stay strong," Lauren continued. "We reminded him of Jacob and Ella. That's what saved him. Now he's with someone who cares for him, a kind, loving woman who helped him through the pain you caused. It doesn't matter who she is." What matters is that she's there for him now. She paused, her gaze piercing mine. Chester doesn't want to see you, Jessica. He won't agree to any conversations, and he doesn't care if you fight the divorce. That will be my battle, not his. Do what you will, but Chester is out of your life for good. With that, Lauren turned and walked away, leaving me reeling. She climbed into the passenger seat of a waiting car, and they drove off without another glance in my direction. Numb, I stumbled down the driveway to where Jacob and Ella stood silently by their cars. The looks on their faces, anger, disappointment, disgust, were unbearable. Jacob reached out a hand to help me when my knees buckled, but there was no warmth in his touch. Ella, arms crossed and her face mirroring her brother's fury, didn't move to comfort me. Their silent judgment was a sharper pain than I had thought possible. Tears streamed down my face as I crumbled under the weight of my grief. I had lost everything, my husband, my marriage, and now the love and respect of my children. Turning, I looked back at the house Chester and I had built together, the home where we had raised our family. It had always filled me with pride, but now it was just a shell, a reminder of everything I had destroyed. My chest heaved as sobs overtook me, the bitter realization settling in. I had no one to blame but myself. What had I done? Why had I never thought about the consequences of my actions? The answer was clear now, but far too late. Consequences, I realized, are a bitter pill to swallow.